Well, if I can use yours, that'd be great.
Yeah, we will obviously. Oh, okay. Oh, there's Henry.
Hello, John.
Now I got to turn that back on. Hi, Jerry.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So, it's like everybody tired of all of this. And so how was your eye appointment, Henry? Good, I hope, since,
I'm gonna get my ears on.
of course, the governor said we can have colonoscopies now.
Yeah. No, it's
That's not
fine.
what my gastrointestinal guy said, but
My doctor talks about everything but my eyes.
that's my internist.
He's got a strange personality.
That's probably better than if he were a pathologist.
Yeah, well, then I wouldn't be talking to him and coming home.
Oh, you might. Remember, we hung out with a bunch of them for 10 years. That's- I got to be one of the doctor's wives.
Get this to go to my earphones and it's not.
Going through this stuff here.
There's the chief.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it to go to my earphones. Select speaker, headphones. I say something.
Okay.
Okay, now I've got it. Too many settings.
I just had to make sure you're not too loud when you are talking.
Henry, so you're, well, let me hang on.
I'll just turn my mute on. Mute. Oh, there's Daphne. Oh. Hello, Daphne. We can see you now, so don't make any rude gestures.
Keep it under the table.
So Henry, your questions were answered?
Yes, I could have avoided all the emails if the first email had been read and answered.
Sorry, so I read the first email and I didn't know that Bruce was doing anything with the manual. So I assumed that it was a question for him because I often get his emails. I mean, like once or twice a week I get his emails. So I just thought it was for him and I forwarded it to him and said, I think this is for you.
I think it was because your name was on the email when it was sent out. Maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. It got resolved.
Yeah,
So-
you sent it to John and I, but I thought it was meant for Bruce. So I said, Bruce, this is for you, thinking that that's who you were asking the question to. So,
No, because it related to the police department, obviously,
Okay.
but it's not a big deal.
okay, but is your question answered?
Yes, and the communication is relatively excellent always, so don't worry about it.
All right.
Hello, Cheryl, and hello, Michael.
Hello, hello.
Oh, there's another Michael sliding in here now.
Earphones here.
There's Bruce. Hello, Bruce.
Hello. Oh.
Hello, Eric. We can
Hey there.
see you now. Did you get a haircut? What'd you do? Drive up to Wisconsin or something? Or did you go to the dog groomer? I'm not sure which. It looks too good for that.
We can't hear you, Eric.
I said, yeah, I did it myself. It didn't turn out too good. Thanks for the compliments, John. I haven't had this haircut since, I think it's been about 30 years.
Well, as you can see, I haven't reverted back to the Navy barbers, but I could go that way. I could get one of them for you if you like.
Yeah, except you won't look as good as me.
Oh, listen to this. All I know is my beard isn't the same color it used to be.
Yeah, mine either.
There's a reason that I don't have a camera on. I cut my bangs this morning.
Oh, well, I know my wife insisted that I turn the camera off for her business calls from home because she's wearing sweatpants and things like that, and she doesn't think that's appropriate. Okay, so we're still short Rick, who should be appearing shortly, I would assume, and Patrick. Rob, I assume that's you who I see as a telephone?
Yeah, I'm here.
Pat, you're really looking more like ZZ Top every day.
I've got a lot of time at home to really focus on my craft.
I thought it was one of the Duck Hunters or whatever the name of those guys was. Duck Dynasty.
You got to get yourself one of those old roadsters.
The only thing is, you could be the guys that were always looking for Bigfoot or whatever it was out in the mountains.
John, I just have a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
When I opened up what was the final package, the minutes appear to be the minutes from March 3rd.
That is correct. See? So the answer is yes.
Minutes from the last meeting.
Should be.
Those were sent out separately, I think, the minutes from the last meeting.
Well, they went out, and then we'll explain on the record here in a minute. I think I'm recording.
I got it. I see what happened.
It's flashing light. So one of you Zoom people who's an expert, Daphne, does that mean it's recording?
It says it's recording.
Good. Okay. Then it's 7:30, so I call to order the Board of Trustees for the Village of Riverwoods meeting of May 19th, 2020. The meeting is being held through electronic attendance pursuant to Executive Order 2020-07. Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Chamberlain,
Here.
trustee Clayton,
Here.
trustee Goldstein,
I'm here.
trustee Jamerson,
Here.
trustee Hollander,
Here.
trustee Haber,
Here.
President Norris.
Here. All right, may the record reflect that we have full board attendance this evening. We have dispensed with the Pledge of Allegiance for obvious reasons. First item of business is approval of the minutes from the Board of Trustees meeting from March 3rd. It's shown with some red line on it. Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any other additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The minutes of March 3rd are approved. Prior to the meeting, there was a question since the final packet went out without the minutes from March 5th. There were a number of comments and requests from trustees that the clerk and I are going to try to work through that tomorrow. It was just not in a position to be presented with all of the suggestions. And I'm not sure whether we'll just throw all the suggestions in or just try to trim it down and include them in some way.
By the way, you said March 5th, you mean May 5th, I think.
May 5th, I'm sorry. Thank you, Henry. I can't, they blend together with my old eyes when I look at the agenda there. Yes, May 5th minutes. Village ecologist is not here. Treasurer's report.
We've got the financials through the end of April, and everything is running pretty much as expected. We would be right on the budget forecast if it weren't for the fact that road and bridge expenditures significantly exceeded the budget year to date by about $57,000. So if you look at the bottom of the general fund columns where it says actual year to date, we're running a deficit actually of 254,875, and we had budgeted a deficit of 241,014. So, and from a cash standpoint, we're pretty much the same as we were last report.
And what is it? What's the road and bridge overage due to?
Pat, can you address that one, why the road and bridge went up? I know it's about like 38,000 that went through already, and that's earlier than we anticipated it going through.
I guess I'm not 100% certain what we're putting in the road and bridge. We've had a few drainage items that we've addressed, but I don't recall processing that much in invoices.
Okay, well then we'll double check and see. I know that's where the major difference was in the expenditures for road and bridge, that it was about $30,000 higher than was anticipated. So
Yeah,
didn't mean to ambush you, Pat, but I saw that myself this evening and wanted to know as well.
No, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. We would note too that you can see that our revenue is not up to projected revenue either, and I'm afraid that's only going to get worse. Engineers report. See, Pat, I just was warming you up early.
Thank you for that. Just for those that are wondering and haven't found out already, just how much rain we got over the last 5 days or so. Riverwoods, our gauge over at the Thorngate Reservoir between the 10th and the 18th registered 5.1 inches, which is, you know, as we can see, it's a meaningful amount of rain, but perhaps to put it in perspective, Just last year, the state updated what's called Bulletin 70. It's kind of the Bible engineers use. It's where we come up with all this nomenclature for the X year storm. It's got all the statistical rainfall data and all the machinations that come up with it. And SMC for the county figured that all of the rain in that period comes out to be just about a 4-year event. So it's, it reflects the fact that we are seeing more and more rain. They've now updated the statistics for it, and events that cause a great deal of heartburn for us are becoming more and more routine.
Well, I can attest to that. When you look at the National Weather Service projection on the river and the high levels, you can see that I think it's 5 of the highest 10 crests all came since I've been mayor. And I don't think we're doing any extra rain dances, so.
There may
could
be some
a chance,
causality there. And
Daphne, did you want to say something? Oh, okay.
No, she's typing, so it's picking up the noise of her typing.
Okay, I just saw the yellow frame come on. Are there any questions for Pat? Hearing none, then Director of Community Services report.
A number of tickets have been issued, and of course we haven't been to court. Court is closed, and so when we resume, it's going to be quite a backlog. I imagine maybe for police as well. Sweet Basil, we're bringing in an independent inspection team to look at the hood and duct system. This is all mostly new, and we want to make sure it passes inspection. Fire district is on board with that as well. Letters just went out recently is for our, I believe it's 16 properties that are on septic that requires the annual septic evaluation. Reminder letters in the letters included extra time if they needed because of the virus. We're willing to work with folks a little bit. And lastly, Cody Goodman, who was given a wrestling proclamation. He's the son of Drew Goodman, a resident in the village, has made another achievement in wrestling. And when we're back meeting again in person, I believe he wants to come in for his honorary day, and we'll do a sign hopefully, and like we did a year and a half ago or so. That's all I have.
Are there any questions for Rob? All right, then Zoning Board of Appeals did not meet. Plan Commission?
Not meet.
Okay. Police report.
Yeah, your mic's not on.
How about now?
No, it's good.
Okay, it wouldn't let me at first. Okay, so I'm pleased to report that Officer Al Masciarello received the Lake County Major Crash Assistance Team Investigator of the Year Award at last Monday's virtual MCAT meeting. I was present when they gave him the award, and there were 60 members on the team, so it was quite an achievement for him to be the Investigator of the Year. So very proud of Al. Since the stay-at-home order went into effect, the police department and the fire department have partnered to do 31 birthday parades for children. And I just want to point out that when we do these parades, we're only doing them with just the fire department and the police department. If they're talking about having family members and friends and everybody come by for a big parade, we don't encourage that because it's not really what the stay-at-home order says. You're supposed to stay at home unless you have essential business. We're not stopping people from doing either. We're just not participating if they're bringing in outside cars to be in the parades. But the feedback from the residents has been very, very positive. Got a lot of nice thank you notes. I did coordinate with Pat and John and Rob during the heavy rain A few residents did call in to ask about sandbag availability, and we did get some sandbags together. We got some sandbags and we had them filled and ready to go in case it kept raining and the river kept rising, but thankfully it hasn't so far. We've completed the switchover at Village Hall and the police department for the phone system. We switched from AT&T to Comcast. We have all new phones. We're still working on some of the off-site areas, lifting stations and such, to change those phones over to Comcast too. When all is said and done, we should be saving $1,230 per month, or $14,760 per year, or over the 3-year contract, we'll save $44,280. And that's all I have.
Assume, yeah.
Go ahead, Henry.
Can I assume that we have gotten no further with the county regarding our agreements that we seem to have can't get out of?
So, one second.
Chief, I had to get a call there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I had it on mute. So we've gone back and forth with the county, and in talking to our attorney, it doesn't seem that we have much recourse if they're not going to let us out. So I did negotiate with them some more, and they're going to purchase for us a new radio system that we need, that the rest of the state has been going to, called Starcom. And they're buying us 6 radios, which cost about $5,000 each. So we are getting that, and they're going to purchase them, program them, and then in a few years when we need new laptops, they'll buy us laptops also for our cars. But that's as far as we've gotten. It looks like we're going to be staying in the Lake County ETSB.
So we're not getting as much as we were, but at least we're getting something, and we'll have to work it from there. I will say Bruce has done a yeoman job here trying to get these phones working and the rest of us educated. Anybody that's gone through changing phones in their office knows what a headache that can be, and especially since everybody has to wear masks and all of that. And as far as the sandbags, I can say 15 of them have been picked up. I'm not sure what they were doing with them, but 15 were picked up. One family put about 10 of them in a Mercedes, which I thought was a little strange in and of itself. But again, I guess if the water's coming up, you're going to make sure you get what you can. Anyone have any other questions for the chief? All right, then, village attorney's report.
I wanted to update the board. We had a discussion about vacating streets, and I put together a memo. And in the memo, I indicated what the voting threshold was under the municipal code. That's certainly binding on non-home rule communities, and I told you it was 3/4 of the trustees holding office. After that, I got a couple of questions about whether any of the trustees had conflicts, and I don't believe that they do. And I won't go into all of that now, but while I was thinking about that, I said, well, if they did have conflicts, then you'd only have 4 trustees, if that's what the point was, and then you wouldn't have enough trustees to, by the threshold, because you needed 3/4 of the trustees to vote, which is 5 trustees. And then, it occurred to me that we put together an attempt to change the voting threshold on the sale or disposition of property. And I realized at that moment that we're home rule and that the threshold I indicated to you is what is binding on non-home rule. The question then was, can home rule communities alter that threshold? I did a little bit of research. I think some of you have already heard that from the mayor, but I can't find anything that would suggest that we're preempted. And the usual test for whether something is allowed to a home rule community is whether it pertains to its local government and affairs and whether it's not been preempted by the state. There's usually specific language in legislation or in a statute that says that home rule authority is preempted in this area. There are cases that restrict home rule communities even without the preemption language, again, based on some very specific legal theories that the state has proposed a comprehensive regulatory scheme and allowing home rule communities to enter that area effectively is beyond their mandate to operate for local government and affairs. There's a concept of concurrent jurisdiction where sometimes home rule communities can legislate on the same matters as the state as long as they don't necessarily contradict it. I sort of went through all of that in a brief sort of analysis. I just will tell you that I think it's my duty to tell you that I can't find anything that would suggest that as a home rule community, we could not change the voting threshold for the vacation of streets. And I just wanted to, at some point, maybe I will, put together a small supplement to my memo, but since I put that out before the last time, I wanted to let everyone know what I was thinking. That the new threshold that the board could establish, of course, is up to the board. There's probably 25 or 30 instances in the municipal code of different kinds of voting threshold, supermajority requirements. Sometimes it's 2/3, sometimes it's 3/4, sometimes it's worded differently. A majority of the corporate authorities refers to the trustees plus the mayor. A certain majority of just the trustees holding office means just the trustees. So there are all these different examples, and I could provide those to the board if you're interested.
I just have a quick question, Bruce. What would be the threshold for making a change to something that requires 3/4 vote?
I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be a majority vote.
If you remember when we were talking about selling property, that was a point that Trustee Haber brought up, that all of these limits we were placing on ourselves seemed to be sort of empty because we could do away with it before we voted and then be back to a simple majority. So unless there's something in the statute, which I don't believe there is, I think it would be a simple majority. Just never sure with home rule powers.
It's an interesting question. I didn't do an exhaustive analysis of it. I kept looking within any of the decided cases under street vacation. I kept looking in the cases that discuss, there's a couple of leading cases in the last few years that discuss the limits of home rule authority. And I was reading the language that the court was using to see how it might apply in our circumstance. A lot of the supermajorities are stated in the municipal code in cases where there is something like a disposition of municipal property. I mean, obviously, the property that the municipality has is held in trust for the public. That's conventional legal understanding. And I think that there are safeguards put in place to keep assets of a public body from being wasted or, disposed of improperly. So as we were discussing before with the sale of the leases on the water tower, the sale of property is one of those areas where there's a supermajority requirement. Certain kinds of arrangements, financing arrangements, certain kinds of long-term leases. Those are all examples of where the municipal code put a certain hurdle in front of public bodies before they could act too, precipitously.
It sounds as if there are 4 variables. One is whether or not you need 2/3 or 3/4 of the board. That's two variables, and the third and fourth variable is whether you need whether it's includes the mayor or doesn't include the mayor. It seems to me that if we're going to be potentially changing this, and I'm not suggesting we either discuss that tonight or go ahead and do it, but I think it's worthwhile for us to clean up our policies, our ordinances, so that we have let's say, a pretty standard way of approaching some of these issues, rather than having what could be, in my mind, one of 5 different ways of getting an issue through, either a majority, 2/3, or 3/4, with the mayor, without the mayor. That just is too much. And it sounds too clever by half, that every time we come up an issue that either includes the mayor or doesn't, or either requires 2/3 or 3/4, we bypass it and then go with a simple majority and change the voting rules. So if we're going to be considering this, I would like to have Bruce, if all the other trustees agree, make this code a little bit simpler so that we know which ones require something special and which ones don't. if that's within our ability to do so.
As I recall, one of the difficulties we had when we discussed this last time was being able to adequately categorize things. If the village attorney thinks that we can do that, then I think an overall plan that's a little more simplistic is great. But I think if I recall, that was the difficulty we had previously.
Then I would suggest that every vote the board takes is a majority vote and includes the mayor in cases of tie, except where it's otherwise stated going forward, which means that as we come across issues that we think are special, then you make those through 2/3 or 3/4. You're defaulting to what we all think is a majority vote rather than having all the various exceptions.
Why don't I provide you with a list from the municipal code? Probably 2/3 of them are far outside of our everyday experience. We've never had them, probably won't. This probably comes down to, although it sounds daunting, and I only mention that there are all these examples because there are, but in our case, it probably comes down to 3 or 4 essential decisions that right now, without deviating from the municipal code, would require a supermajority.
Well, I would agree that I think, A, we should have a list provided to everybody about which votes need to be more than a simple majority. I also think, if I'm hearing Henry right, we should set it up in some way that we don't get to change it whenever we feel like it and go back and forth. It should be a more consistent position so that we're not sitting here a week, 2 weeks after we thought we were doing A, and now we find out, well, we could change the rules.
Well,
I don't think that's necessarily good either. I'd like to try to make it where we've set up our own code in some way, and that's not so easily changed that it only takes a majority vote, perhaps.
Well, I don't, I don't know whether we can hamstring a future board by saying a future board has to observe. And I think that's probably why most communities, except with a few exceptions, pretty much adhere to the municipal code.
True. We could also, though, have a board adopt these rules each time we swear in new trustees or re-swear in old trustees so that it's binding for the 2 years that we have a particular board. Because again, I don't think it's fair to be bouncing back and forth depending on where we're sitting. Some uniformity and consistency, I think, would be desirable.
But I would also say, though, that to your point, John, I don't think that you can ask a new board, if you have 1, 2, or 3 brand new trustees coming on, I don't think you can ask them to make that decision the day they enter office or even the month they enter office. I think you're putting them at a huge disadvantage because they don't know anything about what, I just think that, especially for new people, for people who've been on the board, I don't have an issue with that. But if you've got a new person on the board when I came on the board, I had no idea how things were supposed to go. And, you just don't know.
Well, that's something I did try to work on with new trustees coming in, because I know that can be a problem. And I recognize what you're saying. But again, we need to look somehow to try and make it where it is more consistent and we don't go plunging in and decide, well, we don't like it anymore that it was a supermajority and we'll just erase that and start over. I'm not sure the answer, Rick. I hear your problem, but I'd at least like to look at it.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
It's
well,
happened twice now in 2 months, though. We've had 2 instances in 2 months where this has occurred. Is it possible to make all votes a majority vote
Susan?
with enumerated exceptions?
I will take a look. For example, a certain type of vote is required for disposition of a property in a TIF district. That would be one where I couldn't foresee whether, because it's a state process, whether that might trump a home rule authority. So these are instances where we have had, those kinds of votes. So let me drop the list of the ones that really, for the most part, have arisen in the village, and then you can look at them and see whether you think a uniform approach is what you'd like.
Well, I think that would probably be appropriate. Mr. Haber?
I think that to the extent that we are going to decide on a voting methodology which is different than what the state statute says, and we're going to do it by virtue of our home rule authority, I think to the extent that that may impact certain residents, because obviously this discussion is being had regarding the vacation of the streets, I think that the residents should be able to weigh in on it and they should be provided with appropriate notice.
Well, certainly, given what it could be affecting, I wouldn't necessarily argue that point. My point is, that, as I say, I'd like just more consistency. I think that would be good for all of us. And frankly, those of you who've been on the board for a while, as have I, this hasn't come up very often. I can only think of a couple of times where we had to be concerned about how the numbers actually worked. So maybe we're just lucky that it came up twice in the space of a couple of months, but.
It came up, by the way, in the case of the leases. It wasn't that we were trying to avoid the voting threshold, because the board was in favor of the transaction. The issue that we avoided was that the municipal code has a lengthy process for advertising and bids and things like that to sell property that's not deemed surplus property. And because of the timing of the transaction, we wanted to avoid a lengthy process that would have no meaning in that context, where we had been negotiating with a party for months and it was a very unique deal. So, and that is one of the more common examples where home rule communities will often give themselves more liberal provisions for disposing of property rather than going through a complicated, publication of paper 3 times and notice and that stuff. Well, that's why we did it before.
I think we've heard a lot of opinions here. I would like to have a list of all the different voting requirements, and then we can take a look at just how we might be able to standardize this and maybe solve this problem a little bit. It's probably more work than it's worth, but I do think standardization is desirable with something like this. Otherwise, whoever loses is going to feel like they got cheated somehow, and I can certainly understand why. Because nobody likes having the rules changed at the last minute on something, just so somebody else can win. And so we need to be careful that we make this more systematic. With that, Bruce, did you have anything else?
We got a request from Shabu Shabu, the restaurant, to consider broadening their liquor license if the Liquor Control Commission were to liberalize their rules. They were attempting to do something where they could sell takeout a prepackaged sealed mixed drink. Back in March, the Illinois Liquor Commission said, we're not authorizing anything like that. So Bruce Dano and I quickly sort of arrived at the decision that there wasn't anything we could do for them right now, but I don't know if that's going to hold or if it's been changed. So nothing to do for the board right now. I'm just sort of letting you know that they ask us to think about it. If we find out that there is some way that the state would allow them to do some variation of what they're proposing, it would come back to the board because we would have to amend the terms of their liquor license.
Okay, yes, Mr. Haber.
I think Highland Park has somehow modified their ordinance to allow for takeout during this period of time while restaurants are closed, because there's some of the Highland Park restaurants are providing curbside pickup with packaged liquor. Like with some of the Mexican restaurants are offering like margaritas and things like that. So I know that somehow some of the municipalities are getting around it.
So not packaged goods, Mike, but actually mixed drinks, which is what we're talking
drinks.
about.
Right.
Because we're allowing Shabu Shabu now to sell their whiskey. And so that we knew they could do. And I
mean mixed drink.
Okay, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
I did see in Deerfield, frankly, driving by the Italian Kitchen, it looked like they had bar stock liquors sitting out under their tent, which certainly gave all indications that you could buy a mixed drink of some kind. So
I think that the difference was that they want to mix their own drinks and then create a sealed package. Right. I think some of the others these are things you get from a distributor. So we can definitely explore it. I just thought I would sort of get the temperature of the board for its willingness to consider this. I mean, if there's an opportunity to do something, we'll explore it and we come back to the board, but
Well, I certainly think this would be something as the liquor commissioner that might be one of those things to do to help one of our businesses during this time. That may hump our tickets if the chief has got somebody watching to make sure they're not drinking as they're leaving, but.
Considering that liquor was an essential business
That's
from
true.
the get-go, I think we can look at this a little differently.
Well, if this extends much longer that we shelter at home, we all need liquor, I think.
okay, well, just that's all I have. Mayor.
Okay, any questions for the attorney?
Yeah, one other thing that may come up in the near future as things get relaxed is the availability of outdoor dining, because going inside becomes a little difficult if you want to have social distancing, while outside dining makes it a little bit easier. We have some restrictions on that. And I don't know whether or not during this next month or 2 or 3, especially as the weather's warmer and we still have the social distancing, we may want to relax some of our eating places to have increased outside dining.
Yeah, we did that already for Shabu Shabu, and I think it's really just a matter of how much space do they have available, and if they have the space, then by all means.
Well, phase 3, which is one of the things I was going to point out, that the Northeast District has moved into the range where we should be moving to phase 3 on the 28th of the month, does allow for outdoor dining with appropriate spacing and safeguards. So I think this is something we should definitely double check on. I'm not sure it makes a huge difference, but let's try to get ahead of it and do what we can.
I can just say that what we have is not so much a, I don't know if it's a zoning impediment. We do outdoor dining with a business license. So we might be in a position, if someone comes to us and asks to expand it or have it, we might be in a position to respond now without any dramatic, change in our legislation.
Well, certainly I will do what I can and recommend to the board anything necessary to try and let something go through during this period. Part of our problem is there's not necessarily that much space around some of these restaurants or food shops to have much outdoor dining, but we're available. We'll certainly want to do that. Just to be sure, anyone have any questions for Bruce? I think I asked that already, but just to be sure. Okay. On the general information items, one, Lakeshore will be resuming bulk pickup on the 1st of June. That is later than some people have been doing it, but at least they're going to be moving to that. Second, and I see how the numbers got messed up in the final packet, the item about the General Assembly meeting for the next 3 days to, in essence, ratify what the governor has done, I believe, and perhaps address some of the financial issues, got squeezed into the back end of Lakeshore's information. That ties into the local government distributive fund. We're still hearing all kinds of stories. The Senate president in the conference with Mayor Lightfoot on Sunday didn't say specifically that they would be reducing our share, but that there would be a significant reduction in revenue in Springfield. And one, certainly that will reduce our share, or our amount, I should say, even if we receive the same share. And it's certainly being considered to readjust our share again. It might have been thought to be contractual, but it certainly doesn't seem to bear that status when push gets to shove in Springfield.
John, can you give us an approximate what the numbers might be? I mean, they reduced the share by 5%, what that means in dollars?
Well, they're talking about a $5 billion deficit above where we were even before COVID. So they've got to try to pay their bills. I would imagine that they might be looking to take a quarter to a half off, but I can't give you any real number because nobody's proposed anything yet.
What I meant, what is that practical effect on us if they take a quarter point off?
Mike and Cheryl, you can correct me, but I think we get about $500,000 a year in the local government distributive fund. So it could be 100,000 to 200,000. So that's, again, not counting with the reduction otherwise. So we'll see. They should be loosening some of the money that's coming from Washington, but that ties into what we have next. Pat and I have been looking at all of the grants with the COVID and everything else. The, was it Fast Track? Was that the name for it, Pat, I think? Where if it was shovel ready and it was 500,000 and you were ready to go, you could go forward with it, but you also had to retain a administrative, a specialist for accounting for this. I'll let all of you figure out why the grant required that. And frankly, we don't think we have anything that would make it, because we don't have anything shovel ready that really fits into the water or streets or whatever that they're talking about. There are probably another $50 million or so floating out there right now still in other funds. And we believe that it would probably be appropriate and advantageous to retain the services of one of these consultants. Pat has worked with administrative consulting specialists in the past. We talked with one of their representatives yesterday. He seemed very knowledgeable. We did not receive the proposal yet that we were trying to get through. I knew I couldn't get it approved tonight, but I at least wanted to float it by you. I believe it would probably be in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. But without having too much more than that, I hate to go too much farther on that. Pat, you've unmuted.
Oh, no, I agree. I guess of course, I probably don't need to tell anybody, but there is no guarantee that anything gets funded either. Our projects in all likelihood would be largely, well, they would be conceptual at this stage. And, we're getting pretty used to hearing from whomever the agency is, whether it's the feds or the state, the magic words shovel ready, and we're not there. We gave some thought to, well, is there some portion of the heritage site next door, but that project, there's not enough local share in that even to get to the $500,000 minimum grant threshold. And what I'm being told from ACS is the state's not looking to make $500,000 grants. They're looking to make $2-3 million grants. They want projects that are going to make a big splash someplace. So, we can, we'll see when we get a proposal from ACS of what it takes to put together a Rebuild Illinois infrastructure grant. And then we can decide if we want to move forward with that process.
At this point, I don't even want to ask everyone if they have a general yes or no, other than does anybody have a specific objection to doing this that you'd say no matter what the proposal says. Otherwise, I'll have to talk with you because we'd kind of like to get moving before the next meeting, but it may have to take that long. Yes, Mike?
I mean, it's been my experience that a lot of consultants who work on writing grants generally get paid if the grant is provided. And so they get a percentage. It's almost like on a commission structure. Apparently this company, though, doesn't work on that basis. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we haven't seen the proposal. Pat, you may have worked with them. My past experience has been both ways. We might have to give up a bigger chunk of money if we do it on the contingency, obviously, but certainly we can try to negotiate that. Pat?
Yeah, I don't believe ACS works on a contingency or a commission. That's not their business model. And I don't know specifically for these particular rounds of grants, but in the past, other state grants, and I'm thinking specifically of maybe it's OSLAD, that there are specific prohibitions on that sort of contingency. I don't know that that's the case with the Rebuild Illinois grants, though.
Mike, some of that too was when we had the funds for member initiatives, if you remember those. We got a $600,000 grant from Terry Link that way, but the person that helped us do it also got about $60,000 from us out of that. So again, without seeing it, I don't expect you to give me a yes or I'm just asking if there are any flat out no's no matter what. And then once we see something, I'll circulate it and we can probably go from there. Again, I'm just shooting in the dark right now, so I hate to go too far with it. Let me leave it at that. Then the final item I have is Lake County is now providing in Waukegan testing for all government employees as well, asymptomatic or any other way. But since all of you are eligible to go be tested, if you would like to be up in Waukegan. I had to dig out the address because we didn't have that initially. It's 2161 Northwestern Avenue. I don't know if anybody knows where that is up there for sure. That's not somewhere I normally got to, but it is free. All you need to do is take your ID card, which I will point out, the chief is handing out new ID cards. If you haven't gotten them, you should make it a point to get one. So I would actually encourage you to do it because the place where we're lowest on our numbers is on positivity. And that is the number of people who test positive as a percentage. So we're under 20% now. So yes, Mike?
My understanding is that that facility in Waukegan, which I assume this is the same one you're referring to, is actually open to anyone, whether you're a government employee or not a government employee, and it's free. It's just on a first come, first served basis, and you can be asymptomatic. At least that's what I've read on all the Lake County publications that have been issued on that.
I just looked at it today, and what I've been getting in my emails from the state is that it's only for people who are asymptomatic if they are in one of 4 or 5 categories. One of them is a government employee, first responders, hospital workers. Everybody else has to be symptomatic.
Either that or high risk or exposed or something like that. But
It's actually in the email that I sent out to everybody today. I don't have it in front of me, but it lists the categories of people who can go in even if they're asymptomatic.
one way or the other, you guys can all go is the easy answer. And as far as the rest of it, we just go in by what they put out. I think the email Bruce sent around today would have their covering because he sent around their latest email. Cheryl?
Do you happen to know what kind of tests they do at that facility?
Did you pick up on that?
It's the one through the nose, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on then. We did not have any emails before. No one has logged in. I do see one person, so there is one visitor, although we did say that we only take them through emails. Bruce, do you have any emails? No. Okay. So unless somebody who's logged in as Lifelong Learning wants to chirp in, we'll move on to approval of bills. I believe you all had an opportunity to get those either electronically or stop by the village. Do I have a motion for approval of bills?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any questions? Again, I think most of those have already been addressed. I'd like to be able to continue to send them to you electronically and get them back, but I'm not sure I can do that once the emergency is over. So may I have a roll call, please, for approval of bills?
Trustee Chamberlain?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein?
Aye.
Trustee Haber?
Aye.
Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Moving right along then. First item is authorization for emergency water connection for property located at 2375 Riverwoods between the Village of Riverwoods and the owner of said property. I was in on the initial because the resident called me, said his well had failed, they tried to get it fixed, couldn't, etc. Our water line does not run in front of his property. And therefore, we would be doing something we haven't done before, which is allow a long connection to be run as near as I can tell. So there were some issues. Pat has been communicating with the resident and can probably give us a little better idea of exactly where we're sitting right now. Now you can talk. Oh. There we go.
I circulated a couple of email chains that I had had with the homeowner at 2375 Riverwoods. I think, his point is that the well water, the treatment system that he has proven ineffective, and it doesn't appear to be possible and or cost effective for him to replace or upgrade or otherwise modify either the well or the treatment system. And what he asked was, what would, can he run a service line, 2 or 3 houses down the street from where the village has an existing water line. So we kicked this around a little bit to try and come up with what a reasonable approach might be if this, assuming that this is an emergency situation. And I think in that email chain I had included kind of the general outline of what may be one approach, basically where this property owner would pay the connection fee to the village, would pay the costs of running this service to the existing water main, and would enter into an agreement with the village that whenever, if and when the village installs a water main along his frontage, he would then incur the costs of switching the service to the new water main. We have not done anything like this in the past. Probably the closest somewhat similar situation was up on Duffy Lane, where we had a homeowner that she provided us with some test information that she had gotten from the county. I forget what exactly the pollutant was in her well water, but it wasn't good. And that homeowner entered into a recapture agreement with the village to where that homeowner paid for extending the water main across her frontage, and has a recapture agreement for, I think it was 2 intermediate properties that could potentially connect to that water main. So we have not in the past run services, but rather, one way or another come up with a way to extend the water main or didn't essentially provide Lake Michigan water to those customers.
There's a couple
I think in that instance, just a minute, Bruce, wasn't that one where we ran the water main by the homeowner paid for it and then they had the recapture from the other residents, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry, Bruce.
No, I'm sorry. It's the thing I wanted to point out, Pat and I talked a little bit about a special service area. I'm sure the question will come up, or what it would take to extend water here. It's the only thing that we didn't discuss so far. The water is either down by Orphans. You'd have to cross the frontage of Orphans all the way up to Studio Lane. Probably would be on the north side rather than the south side, although Pat says there's sanitary on both sides, so it's not ideal. And just doing a ballpark estimate, Pat, I'm stealing your thunder here, but we were looking at a number like 550,000 to put that segment of main in, and we have potentially 12 homes in that area that could connect based on that segment. And so with a connection fee of $25,000 a piece, the 12 homes would be maybe 60% of the cost of the project. Am I hitting it about right, Pat? So if the idea was, well, it's an emergency situation, maybe we have to let him do this, but can we also look at what we should, because my point is wondering if the water is bad for him. It usually is bad for people in the same area. The report we have is the aquifer in that area is very sulfurous. So it's something to think about. I don't think answers the question of what you do on an emergency basis, but I just think the board should know, sort of the dimensions of the costs involved if we try to run municipal water there.
The resident had indicated that he thought a number of his neighbors were interested in it, but really this is the biggest problem, is trying to get it there fast when he apparently is in need now. I too am hesitant to do what we haven't done, because you lose some of the leverage and incentive for people to get in and actually extend the full main if they can get this smaller hookup. So, Mr. Haber, you're...
Yeah, I just want a clarification. So what we're talking about is his running the water line basically versus the main from the frontage of his property on Riverwoods Road back down to Orphans where it's located. Is that right?
No, it is. He would run a service line from his house up to Studio Lane. So just as
Studio Lane, because that's where it's at.
That's the closer one to him.
It's in both places, Mike. It's at both ends.
Yeah.
So it's just not looped. It hasn't been looped over there. Ultimately, would it make sense to loop it over there at some point?
Well,
yes,
sure.
Everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
So he's here at 2375.
Right.
And yes, it will someday make sense to loop from Studio to Saunders.
And if you ran the main though from Studio to those, to his house, which would basically be 3 houses in between him, right?
Right.
Does that make any sense to have another dead end there or no?
It's less than ideal, but of course we have, there are a number of dead ends longer than that are in the village. So
I have one.
Right. So yeah, I mean, dead end mains are not unheard of in Riverwoods by any means.
it is something we're trying to avoid, and one of the projects that we would be looking at to get into that sweet spot with the state would be extending some of these water mains, because that's the most.
Because my concern is that if he would be willing to extend the main from Studio Lane there, we're going to get closer to being able to have a loop either through Big Oak or through Saunders and Riverwoods Road.
Right.
So has anyone talked to him about whether or not he'd be willing to do that? Front the cost of extending the main and then get a recapture agreement like we've done before.
I mentioned that to him when I talked to him, and he largely dismissed that out of the apparent emergency condition that he has, that to get it designed and permitted through EPA in Lake County, and potentially the upfront costs were it wasn't going to happen anytime soon.
Right, but could we do it on an emergency? Sorry, Rick. Could we do it on an emergency though, and then subsequent to that, he would have a commitment that he would then ultimately extend the main though?
Absolutely.
So Rick, you had a question?
Well, so has anybody, he says his well has failed. Has anybody talked to somebody like Jack Schwal, to see if the well could be dug deeper?
I did.
And?
He said that, yeah, you can go down, if you go, past that aquifer, basically put in a deep well, 1,000 feet, you can get past where all the bad water is. Jack's take was, have you exhausted the treatment possibilities? The specific system he mentioned was a hydrogen peroxide system. He gave me the name of a guy that he had worked with up in Mattawa that has far worse, believe it or not, sulfur issues than Riverwoods does, and said that, in his experience, it's anecdotal, but this firm was able to come up with a hydrogen peroxide treatment system that effectively treated the sulfur issue.
I guess my point, first of all, if this is truly an emergency, which the gentleman sounds like it is, anything that we do with a main is going to take weeks, if not months, to get installed. That's not something that you do overnight. Even, I mean, even if you directionally bore a small service line to his house, it's still going to take time to get it there. You've got to there's shutdowns and all kinds of things that have to be done. I just, plus the cost is there. I wonder if he was trying to find a less expensive alternative. And I mean, I don't know that he realizes what some of these things are going to cost. Did you pass the cost by him?
I told him, I told him the same thing that I told the board, that, you know, there's a $23,500 connection fee to the village. The costs of running the service, I told him, would be his, and I gave him several contractors that he could talk to about getting quotes, and I believe he's already started to contact them. He may not fully grasp what it would cost to get the permit from Lake County as well. And it's in the best of circumstances, I would say you're at least a month to 2 months from actually getting a water service installed. Not to mention coming to agreement with the village.
And by that, you're talking not about a main, you're talking about just him running the line to the water line now.
Correct, because that doesn't require a permit from the IEPA.
Right.
So we really can't provide emergency relief to him because it's too far away. If we had a line, that would be different, but it's just not there.
I have a
correct
question.
statement? Yeah, Mike?
It's for Pat, basically. I mean, I know Pat in certain communities, probably not around here, but I know like in other countries and in like, you know, the Caribbean, they use these cisterns. So you can basically have water pumped. You know, could we provide him some relief that way where he could actually get a water tanker, you know, parked on his property during some interim period where he could connect it to his water system and get water that way to address an emergency?
I don't believe so, because Illinois plumbing code is still pretty strict. For the example I'm thinking of is at Ryerson, you know, they have that whole water recycling system that they wanted to use for like flushing the toilets, and the Illinois plumbing code just would not yield on it. So I'm doubtful that anything other than, you know, either a well permitted through the health department or a water main permitted through EPA would be acceptable.
And Mike, as much as I think it's a great idea that you came up with, I don't think it's a village responsibility to provide him with water. I don't think it's necessarily our responsibility to provide him with water at no cost.
I agree with that, Rick, but it could be a matter of whether we allow him, assuming the county allowed him, because we would have our own
That's
question.
what I was talking about. I was
okay.
That's how I took it.
providing it.
I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, I don't.
Hey, if the village is providing water, I'm going to claim the same thing. My water bill gets big.
You know, if we can ascertain the condition of water in that area, then apart from this particular decision, which I know it's sort of, if it has an emergency dimension, you have to act different. But if we think that the water in this area is having a problem, if we found that out by talking to other people, then probably the board would want to consider starting to roll the project here, because if we start having additional problems like this one, then it would really look crazy to have a bunch of private service extensions. You know, we'd really be in a pickle. So I don't know how we find out what the condition is of other properties there, but you know,
given the problems of trying to let him hook up just physically and with the county, emergency or no, it sounds like we're going to have a little time before he could possibly do it. So I think we should be exploring with the other neighbors just where they're at and see if we can't hook something that while we're also looking at what intermediate step might work for him. As several of you have said, if the water's going bad for one of them, it's likely it's going to go bad for more of them, or has gone bad. Cheryl?
What would the time frame be if we were to extend the water main either partially or further down Riverwoods Road?
I would say to get to design and permit, and then you know, bid, award a contract, Best case scenario, I'd say we're breaking ground in 2 to 3 months.
So not a terribly longer period of time than the other way. So
And actually, the more I think about it, I mean, it's at least a month at EPA. By the time, you know, to get surveys done and get design done, it's let's call it 5 months. 3 months.
well, that's for us, Pat, but what would it be for him then? Isn't he going to have some of those same problems?
You know, the county's not gonna, I don't think the counties will not require as detailed of information for a service connection, particularly if we tell them it's an emergency, you know, and, you know, even more if it was a temporary connection, I don't know that we can necessarily tell them that. But it's simpler and it doesn't need to go through EPA. So there, you know, it takes a month off of the approval process.
There's no fast answer one way or the other, though. Yeah, Mike?
So I'm looking at Google Maps, and it looks like his backyard is adjacent to the backyard of a home on Forest Glen Trail, which I think has water, right? Based
Right.
upon your map. So wouldn't that be a simpler, like, temporary connection just to see if he could extend a line from Forest Glen Trail, and then it wouldn't have to be along Riverwoods Road?
Absolutely. If he had a cooperative neighbor behind him, and I'm not saying that he does or he doesn't, we would, you know, EPA requires that services crossing multiple properties be in an easement or a public right of way. So if, you know, say that his neighbor behind him on Forest Glen Trail was willing to give him an easement, then absolutely we would have him connect at Forest Glen.
Well,
That
Mike,
would-
Even if it was just a temporary easement, you know,
Right.
that would go away once he, you know, we would still mandate that he would have to connect if and when Riverwoods Road had a main running on it.
And Pat, does the EPA have that same with it's a hookup crossing multiple lines as opposed to our going across multiple?
Yes.
Okay, does anybody have an easy solution so far? Henry, is that you raising your hand?
Yeah. Pat, are you saying that the cost of drilling a deep well is significantly more expensive than him running his own line?
No, I'm not saying that. I don't know what it would cost, but it's probably, you know, I would put it in the 50,000+ range, which, you know, if right off the top to connect to Lake Michigan water, it's 23.5 to the village before anything gets built. So it may be more economical to drill a deep well. Our village code has certain restrictions on deep wells, but I believe, and I'm working from memory, that it's entirely in the village's authority to approve or deny permits for deep wells.
So let me reframe this. He has the ability to get water, which is probably less expensive than having the village run a line to his house, but is choosing not to do it. Is that correct? Because he can get water from a deep well at a cost less than what it would do for us to make an exception.
I would say comparable, right? To either between drilling a deep well or running a service 3 houses away, those costs are probably, you know, comparable. It's far more expensive for the village to run water main.
So, and Henry, just to make sure, because of the way you said that, he's not asking us to pay to extend to him. He's paying that. So
Right.
all he's asking from us is the ability to tap on, which we have normally not allowed in a case like this.
But the village's preference is not to have individual taps unless you can't solve the problem a different way. And we're looking to either run a main to take care of multiple properties or to provide him with water he would not otherwise be able to access. And what I'm saying is he can access other waters, and it's not at a cost that's significantly more than the village providing it.
Well, you're certainly taking it out of the emergency category to some extent, in that he could drill the well, even if we said, no, you can't do the individual hookup. We've always wanted to extend the water. That's always been part of our policy, avoiding the dead ends.
I understand, but he's choosing one method over the other and then is asking us to jump through hoops to do it for him. If the policy is to run a main because there may be problems with multiple properties, I think that's reasonable for us to look into. But I don't think we have the urgency, which I thought we had, in that he can't get water. He can. It's just that he's choosing a method that is different.
And I think that's something that we looked at. Frankly, we thought he might change his mind when Pat told him that he had to pay the $23,000 up front anyway, but that apparently didn't scare him off. Cheryl, you wanted to say something, and then Rick, I'll
Yeah,
get back
just
to you.
to extend Henry's point, I think it's minimally worth checking with neighbors and see where they're at as far as getting a main extended in.
I agree. That's in our interest, and I think we want to do that anyway. The question is, what do we allow in between or encourage? Because if he sinks a deep well, I doubt if he finds good water, he's not going to be so interested in necessarily becoming part of an SSA.
So what I'm hearing though is he hasn't really explored these options and compared costs at this point.
It's kind of hard to figure it out, Cheryl, because he's not been as open as he might have been with Pat or I. So,
Also assuming it's a deep well, and there are aquifers between 1,000 feet and 125 feet.
I'll defer to you here, Patrick, and then.
Well, and
then Rick.
I don't think so. I think, you've got our typical shallow aquifer, someplace between, 125 and 300 feet. Then you got to go through a bunch of stuff before you get to another reliable aquifer, which is the quote unquote deep aquifer down around 1,000 feet.
So do we know how deep his well is? No.
I do not. Jack did not drill that particular well.
Okay. Well, the other concern I have is setting a precedent, because this won't be the first well that goes bad or is sulfury or something else, and we're going to end up with a bunch of long service taps if we don't construct the agreement properly. So.
Well, I think I've certainly heard enough to know where the board's coming on this one, to know what I think we need to do, which is investigate the neighborhood and talk with him about options that are more directly in his control and his expense than breaking our policy. Mr. Haber?
Just one final comment, though, is that I think that, at least from my perspective, we have a village resident who sent multiple emails to Pat, which I am going to take at face value, at least at this point in time. And it appears to me that he is in a very dire situation, especially because he is at home because of this pandemic, and he doesn't have water. So I, for one, think that we should do everything humanly possible to address his concerns, even if it means that we have to make some exceptions under these circumstances. Obviously, we need the protections, but at the same time, if it was either one of us, we would all be looking for some help in this otherwise extremely stressful time that everyone is involved in. And so I think we should basically do whatever we can to help this family out. He's paying over $30,000 a year in real estate taxes for his home in Riverwoods. And we're concerned about our residents, each one of us on the board. And I think we should show that concern by doing something for him.
Okay, if I gave the impression that I was going to just tell him to go away, that's not what I was trying to say. But I think I need to work with him a little bit more to make sure that he's truly exploring all of his options before we have to go that far, but see if we can provide some relief in between. Rick, you're unmuted. I don't know if you were wanting to or not.
Well,
Okay.
I don't disagree with you, Mike. However, I will say that probably his well didn't go bad yesterday. It takes time for those wells to go bad, and I do agree that we should try and do everything we can to help him, but I also think that we have to be careful about setting precedents that are going to come back to bite us later in a lot of different ways. So, I think we should investigate everything we can and make but I think we need to make sure that he understands what all the costs are, and it might be cheaper for him to drill a deeper well. And so
That's part of what I'm talking about. We'll have made Pat available to him. We will work and we'll try to find a reasonable solution that still works within the village parameters as much as possible. But I got the clear thing. We're not going to just go too easily, but we're not going to ignore him either.
I will.
Another one of these hard ones.
I just looked up what our village code says about deep wells, and in general, it says that the village will not issue a permit if the cost of getting Lake Michigan water, connecting to the Lake Michigan system, is less than twice the cost of drilling the deep well.
So that answers Henry's question, that the deep well sort of, we won't give him the permit because he has to get the other water. So Patrick, you and I have our work cut out for us here, I think.
Understood.
Get ready with the water truck. Okay, moving on then, the next item is hopefully a little easier to deal with. The Holiday Inn Express, which has been a very good corporate resident, has been paying their taxes, et cetera, and is worth about $130,000 to $170,000 a year to us. Normally it has a 60% occupancy rate. Right now they're about 5 to 6%. And they've taken a number of steps to try to live through this, but they've asked for some relief. And the finance committee met with Kathy Buchanan, the manager, and oh heavens, I can't think of his first name now. I hope one of you two young people can, oh wait, Mike, you're not young, sorry. Cheryl, you have to remember then, Mr. Hodes.
Was it Ron?
Ron, okay. Their vice president of Golden Properties, I think is the name of the people. And they did ask what we might be able to get. So the three of us talked, and Mike, I think you came out with the best formula. So let me ask you to provide the board with what our thoughts were and recommendation.
Well, you kind of explained the background that I was going to give. I think that they're paying approximately $2,600 a month in special use fees. And when you consider the current occupancy rate, they're paying a very small amount of hotel tax right at the moment. So, and if we're trying to protect an income stream of about $150,000 a year, it would seem to me that an investment of about $15,000 to help them survive at this particular point in time would be appropriate. And so my proposal to the board would be that we forgive the special use fee and the hotel tax for 90 days. And then we take another look at the situation and see what the village financial situation is, as well as where we are with international travel and travel, which is a big portion of their business, and decide whether further assistance is warranted, if any. I think that we're also, the finance committee is also looking at the potential of a retail grant program, which we haven't had time to talk about yet and bring to the board. But I'm trying to put this in the context of a broader support program for our ongoing tax revenue. And at least at this juncture, it seems to me that it would be appropriate to do some kind of a 90-day forgiveness of the hotel tax and the special use fee for Holiday Inn.
Well, Cheryl, did you want to add something? And then Mike will.
Only that we also discussed with them where their revenue was coming from previously and potentially what adjustments they could make in order to find new business, because a lot of their old or previous revenue streams are dependent on, as Mike said, more travel that probably isn't going to happen. So we talked about some other avenues.
Yes, Mr. Haber, you had a question.
So for Mike, how does the forgiveness of the hotel tax actually affect them? How does that benefit them at all? Because isn't that a pass-through item to the user?
Well, they're currently occupied at 5%. So
But they
to
would
the
be
extent to which they have a user that is going to pay the tax and pass it through, it's something that they can use to reduce the cost of staying at the hotel and potentially attract additional residents.
So
I think that
are you suggesting that they charge the tax to the customer, but they don't remit the tax to us?
correct.
I don't really like that. That seems like a bit of a, makes me feel bad. Makes me feel like we're somehow engaging in some kind of activity with them, which is inappropriate. That they're charging a tax that is actually not being imposed by the village.
Well, we can can't we impose the tax, Mike, and then rebate it?
Yeah, we can, but I still don't like, I still feel like I don't feel like that's really.
Trying to find a way that you like it.
It sounds untruthful in some respect. And so I think I'm all in favor of the issue of rebate, of not charging the special use fee that we implement. Obviously, I think that makes sense, but I think imposing a tax on a customer, but then not actually having to remit that tax, I just don't feel comfortable with that.
Mike, it's not unlike the sales tax that we can have in a special business district where we could remit a 1% part of the sales tax back. We charge it theoretically as sales tax, but then they get it rather than us. So it's very similar to that, Rick.
It's no different than what Woodman's is doing to Buffalo Grove. They're collecting sales tax on every person that buys something there, and Buffalo Grove is paying them back for all of the public improvements they did, up to $7 million.
Right.
So,
That is a standard, business development tool that is available to. We even talked about that with the Flanagans, that we could create a special district for that. So I understand what you're saying. You feel like it's a little bit of a shell game maybe, but it is not unheard of, and especially in these circumstances, I think it does make some sense, especially because these guys have been good. They've always been on time and have, again, not like been some of our residents. If we lost them, could another hotel come in? Maybe, but I'm not sure it would be as good or as well run. I think we've all known how some of those work. Rick?
Mike, would you be more comfortable with us collecting the tax and coming up with a fixed sum that we grant them back? So
we can just rebate whatever it is.
Well, no, because then you're back in the same situation. I'm just saying.
I see.
If the number is $15,000 that Trustee Clayton was talking about, and they're paying $2,700 a month. If you subtract 3 times that from the $15,000, then just tell them we're going to give them the rest as a grant to get them through, and they can pay the tax and whatever it is. If it's 6% occupancy or 15% occupancy, would you be more comfortable with that?
So do we know what that tax is likely to be on a 6% occupancy, or if it goes up to 20% in the next couple of months?
Well, that's just what Mike Clayton was trying to avoid, that if their occupancy goes up, then obviously we're not subsidizing them the same way.
So, because what I'm saying is I think I'd rather just give them another month rebate on their special use, charge, if that's about equivalent, and do it that way. I think it's just cleaner. We don't know what we're giving up, because we don't know their occupancy may go up to 80%. If Horizon starts working and Discover starts working and people start traveling into those facilities, it's an unknown. Whereas it's a known if we just if we know about the special use fee.
Well, Mike, we could always, because we're only doing whatever we feel like doing. We could just say that we'll give you back the first 6%. Anything above that, you got to pay. Because that way, if it comes back in, then they're paying, and I'm not as worried about something like that. But if there were a way to make it a set figure. Cheryl?
Yeah,
Just a
we could
special
even
use
just
fee?
set a flat fee and call it a rebate.
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
special-
bottom
how much
line
is
is
the
getting
special
cash in
use
their
fee?
pockets.
How much is the special use fee?
2,700 a month.
2,700 a month.
They pay the largest special use that we have.
Does anybody think that they're getting 2,700 a month from us is going to mean whether or not that hotel stays or not?
Well, that's part of what we talked with them about, and they're not saying that they will necessarily go away, whatever we give them, if anything, but it's
What
also
they
a
told-
matter of trying to make
Henry,
sure
I
they stay
think
open.
they're currently continuing to pay their employees. They've shut down, I think, 50% of the hotel, including cutting off the power to the hotel. They're doing everything they can to survive at this particular point. And I think the attitude, their projections are that by the end of the year, they may get to about 40% occupancy at best, given the projections on travel and so on and so forth. So their attitude seemed to be, gee, whatever you can do for us would help.
I am in favor of not collecting a special use fee as the maximum per month, as long as the occupancy stays below a fixed percentage, and I don't really care what the board decides as they're on that percentage. But I don't like the idea, as Mike Haber said, of messing with the occupancy tax. The special use fee is something that we impose on them, and it's easy for us to consider not only for them, but for other retail establishments in the village.
Well, certainly, I do think the special use especially, because that we get whether they have any revenue or not. And the other, they do have to rent rooms to pay the tax. But somebody's got to make a motion somewhere. Oh, Bruce, you want to talk first? Go ahead.
Didn't we, I'm just remembering, didn't we waive the special use fee for a period of time at shops?
No.
We
spent
talked
it,
about
we spent the money on other things to help them. So we paid for the text blast through the
Right.
CBR because we thought that would be more directly helping them than the small amount that we would be rebating, working with them otherwise to try and help do things. The board felt that trying to help them generate business and stay open was the best idea. Mr. Haber.
Let me correct that. That's not true. That's not true. We did it. One of the reasons we did it was because we could not be sure that they were going to be giving
That
it
was
to
part
the
of it, too.
individual retail establishments. And
Right.
that was one of the major problems. This is a single establishment.
Right,
where
it was a number of things, and this is a very different number, et cetera. I consider them different situations, but we didn't forego that one originally, partly for the reason you said. Mike?
Isn't this special use fee also associated with the police?
It was originally conceived of that way. There were a number of different impacts that the retail had at the time, and they weren't paying very much property tax. But it's, we didn't do a scientific analysis of the cost. I mean, obviously there's more police burden with our retail establishments, but that was the original impetus for it.
There's no question that the various things, although I suppose we're not likely to be providing police services the fewer people they have, but in all honesty, the chief hasn't had to go over there or send people over very often anyway. So,
Okay.
yes.
I would like to move that we, for the Holiday Inn, that we forgive the special use fee for 3 months, and that we give them a grant of $2,000 as a emergency grant.
A one-time grant of 2,000 right now?
One-time grant.
Okay.
I'll
That'll get
second
us to
that.
about $10,000 in total.
Yeah, I'll second that, if you will, also with the assumption that we'll review again, which I know you already said.
Well, hopefully we won't have to, but I think we obviously would. Mr. Haber?
We can have discussion. I'm all in favor of the special use forgiveness. I'm not so crazy about the grant because I think that we're now going to have a lot of people potentially coming to us seeking additional grants from all the different retailers that we have. in the.
Honestly, Mike, it's my intention to propose that we do exactly that.
Okay, but I think until we have a, a program that is going to run consistently for the entire village, I'd like to hold off, my personal opinion, I'd hold off on the grant portion. We can always give them the grant later after we make a determination as to whether or not we're going to have a village-wide program that's going to assist all the people who are retailers in the community. But on this particular instance, because they're one of the only that actually has a special use fee, I would like to just suggest that we just deal with just the special use fee at this point in time. My opinion, you guys can do what you want.
Well, are you making a motion to continue, or?
I would seek an amendment of the motion if they're willing to do that. I would ask that they amend the motion to just the special use forgiveness.
So an alternative might be, instead of 90 days of the special use fee, we could extend it to 1 more month, and then it will come out to about the same amount. And yes, we are going to be meeting this week to
Thursday.
discuss an overall plan.
So,
I mean, I like the idea that Henry had, which would be tied into some occupancy level. So, if it can be tied into, so long as our occupancy is below, I don't know, 70%, for that 3 months or 4 months or whatever the number of months is, I think that's appropriate as well.
Mike, are you willing to amend the motion to have it be for the period Cheryl stated, with the idea that we revisit for the other monies that we might provide, or not?
I'm trying to figure out how to word this so that I can include Trustee Haber's concept there. Is it proper to amend the motion at this point, or just?
Either way, it might be cleaner to withdraw and make a new motion.
All right, I'll
Cheryl
withdraw.
will agree to the withdrawal, I'm sure. Yes, she will. So
Okay,
cleaner
then
to make a new motion.
This is what I move. I move that we forgive the special use fee for the Holiday Inn for 4 months, and that we reevaluate the situation at the end of the 4 months, and in the context of an overall, any overall retail support program that we may or may not have in the village, as long as their occupancy rate stays below 50%.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, then roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein.
Aye.
Trustee Haber.
Aye.
Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Well, that's good. At least we came up with a solution on something this evening. Next item of business is a resolution authorizing transfer of funds from the general fund to the capital fund, capital projects fund to be precise. That's the label. Relatively short explanation on it, but we have talked about this before, that given we have capital projects, we have a great deal of money sitting in the general fund. It is more appropriate when we think we have potential capital projects to put the money in that. We can transfer it back anytime. There are no restrictions. It's not in any way reserved or something else. In fact, this type of fund, reading the manual from the comptroller, says that when you run out of projects, you're supposed to turn it all to the general fund. So again, it's just a matter of making it look cleaner on the books and making it more appropriate so that we really have a better understanding and a better appearance of how much money we really have in the general fund versus where we're likely to be spending money. Mike?
I think it's just good financial practice, and it provides financial clarity to have the spending that we do on capital projects differentiated from our operating expenses. And in order to help you think through what this might look like, I tried to provide an update to the capital fund information that we provided several months ago, and took out that information that related to the TIF so that it was clearer, and then try to throw together a plan that included every possible expenditure at the highest rate that I could think of going forward, And that required a transfer from the general fund into the capital fund to fund those programs of starting in 2020 of $1.1 million, which happens also to be the amount of surplus that we generated last year, which our financial director indicates is a very appropriate way to kick off the funding of the capital fund. And then depending on what projects are approved going forward, we may choose to transfer another $1 million for the next 2 years after that, which would basically, given all the capital projects that I was able to identify, would deplete that entire fund by the end of 2024. When you do that and you move the $3 million across, the general fund would wind up at the end of 2024, given our forecasts of the operating surplus and deficit going forward, and assuming that we implement the police tax and gasoline tax that we have talked about, plus assuming that we only get 50% of the sales tax revenue and reduced reduced other distributions from the state, we would then basically be running a deficit of $392,000 this year. And that provides a lot more clarity as to what our actual operating deficit is going forward. And it's not colored by the capital investments that we're making. And the general fund, rather, excuse me, would end up at the end of 2024 with still close to $6 million in cash. And we've double checked the water fund and sewer fund numbers, and it appears that the projections that we have at this particular point indicate that they'll stay close to the target balances in both of those funds without any additional infusion from the general fund. So this seems to me to be the appropriate way to be analyzing and measuring our financial situation, and provides much more financial clarity with regard to what it is we're doing.
I want to also emphasize, and I'm sure everybody knows, this is not approving any spending. It's just saying we look forward that we have these various projects and we're likely to spend this much money. So this is money that should be saved or thought of as being there rather than somewhere else. Sort of like the escrow, it's what you pay for your property tax on the year. Yes, Bruce.
I'm not seeing the actual text of the resolution in the packet. I could be missing it. I'm scrolling on a second screen here. Just for the board's information, it's a very simple resolution that says that the board finds that significant amount of the 2019 operating surplus in the general fund to the capital project fund resulted from a non-recurring sale of telecommunication leases.
Right.
The President Board of Trustees find that a transfer of, and it's the amount that's indicated in Nathan's memo, $1,151,336,000 from the general fund to the capital project fund will promote more effective financial planning for the village, and then resolves that the transfer of that amount from the general fund to the capital project fund be approved. I'm sorry, I didn't see that it was.
Well, I should have had it in there and somehow I seem to have missed it, so.
It was a simple, I'm trying to forward it now if I can.
Well, I'll move that we adopt the resolution that the village attorney just read.
I'm trying to share the page and I'm not that adept at this, so bear with me, fans.
Am I correct in that I think I sent an email earlier, I just want to verify it, maybe if for other members of the board, that there are no further encumbrances or restrictions that would occur by moving it from one fund to another?
That's correct.
That's correct.
There we go. Again, this is, it's just putting it into another fund and making it clear that we have that much allocated for other potential purposes so that it doesn't look like we have quite as much money sitting in the bank as it might otherwise.
Can you scroll your screen up just to?
I'm trying to figure it out, Cheryl. I apologize. Here we go. I'll try to get rid of some of this stuff too. But it really is pretty straightforward. It just says that we contemplate doing these things, so we would put the money into a separate fund. And again, if you decide next week to bring it back, we can. Does everybody have a look at that? I can forward it if you really want to see it, but it's pretty straightforward. Somebody's printing something somewhere. So, oh, help. God only knows what I'm doing. Sorry, folks. Obviously, so we need some Zoom training. So we've had a motion. Was there a second? I'm sorry, I was busy trying to share the resolution.
I seconded.
Okay, is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion is approved. And just so you know it, it's important that we do this by resolution because right now we're still trying to figure out if the water fund owes $700,000 still to the general fund. Because we have a resolution where we forgave $100 and some thousand of an $883,000 indebtedness, and we don't find any more resolutions anywhere. So they're better to have these things and make sure we have a clear record. Okay, moving on then, resolution for approving resolutions to the, revisions to the personnel manual. Bruce?
We provided a red line. I've been storing up recommended updates to the personnel manual because of changes in Springfield, legislative changes that mandated certain things. We got the sample policies and changes that needed to be made from our insurance council. I adapted them to our manual. So we weren't intending to change any really substantive policies. The red line, I hope, speaks for itself. A number of the changes dealt with updating because of the legalization of cannabis. There was a state law that requires that we reimburse employees for certain travel and business expenses. And there's some changes in the sexual harassment, I guess not even just sexual, but all kinds of harassment that we made.
The
So
insurance people having.
So my hope is that the board will approve these changes. We'll provide a clean copy to the website and have an updated manual, at least through the current session of the legislature.
So I know some of you had some comments on that, Mr. Clayton.
I'm sorry, I forgot to say, there are a couple typos that Cheryl gave me, which I will correct. Henry pointed out that we didn't attach the appendix for the ethics officer. John, you were going to point out that you talked to someone about being our ethics officer.
Yes, Chris Ford was willing to volunteer to be our ethics officer. Got to be nice to her. She's married to a lawyer. The poor woman's a saint.
And I did speak with Henry earlier about one of his concerns on the difference between alcohol and cannabis treatment in the policy.
So, Mr. Clayton, you started to have a question.
No, my question was about the ethics officer, so.
Cheryl.
I just want to report that I had spoken with Bruce earlier that I think putting these changes all together for now are fine, but in the future, I think it would be cleaner and more understandable for the employees to have a separate manual for the Village Hall employees and a separate manual for the police, because right now the way with all of it together, employees are being asked to ignore certain portions that don't apply to them, and I just like a cleaner document. For now, I think it's fine.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that because there is a significant difference between Village Hall staff and our uniform officers, and it might be worth separating them out. So do we have a motion to approve the resolution approving revisions to the personnel manual?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Resolution is approved. Next, we have an ordinance authorizing disposal and sale of village-owned personal property. This is the phone system that we no longer need. At one point, the chief thought he had somebody who was willing to buy the units from us for $1,000. That deal has fallen through, but we still would like you to approve this so we can go ahead and get it done. Certainly, we have no use for these phones now, and given that they're at least, I think, 8 years old, I think if we can get $1,000, it would be great.
I should just clarify, it refers to Owatsu mobile phones. Later, I corrected that to be desktop phones. It was the desktop phones and system equipment that we're selling. They weren't mobile phones. Sorry.
So I would need a motion for waiving first reading, and then actually, we don't have to waive first reading, but it'd be just as well to get this off given what it is.
I'll move to waive first reading.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of waiving first reading signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, second reading and adoption. Henry?
I think Henry had some discussion before we voted.
Is there a way for anything that the village wants to put up for sale to make it available to village residents 7 days, 10 days, 14 days ahead of the general public by putting it on the village website?
I think it is possible to have a procedure where we list things on the website. I don't know if confining them just to residents would be allowed, but I think we could say that, you know, we could even in an ordinance like this simply say that if something is going to be sold before it be sold through some negotiated purchase, that we at least, if the village president thinks appropriate, list them on the village website and see if anybody is interested.
I'm happy to do that if my attorney tells me I can do it. So.
Well, the idea is that the village residents through the taxes pay for these items, and if they're gonna, they should have the opportunity, if they're looking for an old truck or a, I don't know, whatever, old lawnmower, that they should have a prior opportunity than just someone who goes out.
Well, Henry, I'm in total agreement for smaller things, but usually when they're like the truck, that's a large enough item with an auction. There's enough money involved. It's probably better to let the whole village get as much back as we can.
I'm not saying it's restricted.
But in general,
it's not restricted to the village residents. I'm just saying they have an opportunity to purchase it earlier than the public.
well, but that's still restricting the market that would be available to bid on it. So that's the only risk. But Bruce?
Oh, what we talked to, John and I talked about was maybe coming up with an ordinance that said for like $1,500 and under, the village president could authorize the sale of this kind of property without going through this ordinance stuff every time. That I think we could do, and maybe if we put together an ordinance like that, we could say, and you know, as part of the procedures the president is authorized to do would be, you know, listing them on the village website before, you know, as one method of negotiating a sale.
That's fine.
So yeah, I mean, Henry, I do understand what you're saying, and I am sympathetic to the idea of trying to let village residents get a first shot at it. Mr. Haber, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to? Okay. So I now need a motion for second reading and adoption of a ordinance authorizing disposal and sale of village property, village-owned personal property, excuse me.
So moved. Second.
All right, further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein?
Aye.
Trustee Haber?
Aye.
Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson?
Aye.
Ordinance 20-0504.
Okay, thank you. Now, final item on the agenda is the committee recommendations on and approval of bid proposal for the Flatwoods Heritage Center, otherwise known as the campus plan. Mr. Jamerson?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen or try to. Stand by. Okay.
Looks good from here.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to give a little history about my role in this. I was not on the design committee, and I was asked by the mayor to run this project if it comes to fruition. And as part of that, I said that if that was what was my role, I would be happy to do that since I'm the only person on the board that has any kind of construction experience. I would do that, but I wanted to be involved in the lead up to the project, which is the creation of the drawings and the bidding of the project. So that's where I am, and that's why I'm here now. I hope everybody understands that I am not usurping anybody else's position on this committee, because I am not doing that. And it was at my behest that the committee, as it was that I am now on, decided to have the drawings made for everything, and the bids made for everything. And it was at my behest that the bids be broken out the way they were broken out, so the board could better review what was put in front of us. So if there's anybody that is upset with what is being presented, I apologize. That was no intention of mine. I just thought, from being in the construction industry, that the right way to do this was to get all the facts and the figures in front of the board. And so that's where we are right now. What you're going to see now is about an hour-and-a-half presentation. Just kidding. Thought maybe somebody would smile. It won't take that long.
The chief smiled, don't worry.
You saw this before. It's pretty much the exact same thing I showed you before, but I have put the budget numbers alongside the numbers that we received from the bid. There was only one bidder. Several people picked up drawings, but only one person, one company turned in a bid. It is a bidder called Klaus Brothers, and Ken, who helped me with his last name, John, the architect, the designer, whatever his name is. Anyways, the designer.
Ben Kutchide.
Thank you. Ben, not Ken. I was close. Ben has worked with this company before, and he's familiar with their work, and he was actually happy that they turned in a bid. So that's where we are. So I'm going to move through this. You've seen this. This is the original plan. These were the project components, the ones on the, well, these are the project components. And I'm actually going to go through, the grant items are on the left. These were the required items that we submitted for the grant, and the alternates that we asked to be priced are on the right. The total base bid budget for the items on the left was $503,028 plus a 10% contingency, which brought that total to $553,301. The base bid we received was $534,296. So it was below the budgeted cost. We did not ask them to break out the base bid. So all those things got lumped together. I probably would have asked him to do an accounting line item, but that just didn't get put in the bid. I'm going to suggest that the difference of $19,005, which is the difference between the budget and the bid, be left in for contingency purposes because nothing ever goes the way you think it's going to go. So these are just the parts of the base bid, the shelter, the patio, the pathway on that end of the property, the woodland education area, the accessible fire pit, the landscape screening, and that's it. I think the drinking fountain should have been, the drinking fountain, which I didn't show, is also part of that base bid. So alternate one, which was the Discovery Center pathway, had a budget of $28,940 and the bid came in at $7,556. The next item was the play area, which was, the budget was $233,184. The bid came in at $255,308. The drinking fountain I guess it was an alternate. The drinking fountain had a budget. No, I'm sorry. The drinking fountain was originally supposed to be on the building, and that's in the base bid. This is to put the drinking fountain out by the shelter, which had a budget of $5,000, and that came in at $5,860. The fence budget, and hold on a second because I can't see the budget because the pictures are in the way. And my mouse. Hold on. The fence budget was $15,000 and the bid was $7,310. The path on the west side of the building was $10,697 and the bid was $7,855. There were 2 columns at the patio that were an alternate ad. The budget was $13,000. The bid was $10,129. And lastly, the stone surrounds at the shelter had a budget of $26,400 and the bid was $3,507. So there was quite a bit of difference in some of the budget and bid numbers. So here's a recap of all those numbers. The base bid came in at $534,296. The total of the alternates as bid were $297,525. The total if all the work is completed is $831,821. The grant has a maximum amount of 50% of the cost up to $300,200. The village cost, if only the base work is completed, once you take the grant out, is $267,148. And the cost of the village, if all the work is completed, is $531,621. And I don't have anything else other than that. I'm open to questions, comments. I'm going to unshare I guess I'll leave my screen up there.
Yes, Henry?
Am I correct in that the fence was mainly suggested because of the playground?
Yes. You don't really need the fence if the play area is not there.
If you remove the fence and the play area, what is the village cost?
Okay, I can do some math. Hold on.
About 297,000, close to 300,000.
Which would be the maximum that we would get an equal amount from the state.
No. Well,
yeah. Okay. I'll just make a general comment. I mentioned it to a few other individuals. I find that it's difficult to spend significant amounts of money by the village when we are having a reduced revenue, expect to have a budget loss, and are going to probably be increasing taxes at the end of the year. However, I also don't want to lose the ability to get a matching funds of $300,000. And to me, one of the most controversial areas was the playground, which happens to be also coincidentally the largest cost. So I would like to throw out there, just for consideration, approving everything but the playground and fence, which would still be on our capital projects list to be completed at some future date. And I don't think that it would cause us a significant amount of more money to add that 5 years from now, let's say, or 3 years from now, than by doing it today. I just find the optics very difficult to put out to the public, spending the village $300,000 in our present circumstances.
Other comments?
Well, as you might suspect, I'm in favor of the entire project. I think one of the main reasons to include the play area in the entire project is that at this particular point in time, is that it draws people to use the facilities that we're spending a lot of money to build, and creates a family outdoor central gathering space that it can be used by people outside of the formal events that are put on by the village. And I think it plays a role in increasing our property values, and I think it's a positive sign to the people in the village rather than a negative sign that we believe in the future, and that we're building, we're investing in the capital structure of the village in order to promote a better future for the village, and something that's consistent with our branding. I believe that the village can easily afford this. It's entirely different than the operating deficit that we are dealing with now and going forward. And this has absolutely nothing to do with tax increases. This can be paid simply out of the now new capital fund that has been established. So I would like to move, actually, that we accept the Kloss Brothers bid for the entire Flatwoods Heritage Center project, including the base and all alternative elements, with a total expenditure not to exceed $850,000 less the ASLID grant.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that motion because I agree with Trustee Clayton on his points.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Yes, Mike?
So I completely agree with Henry. I'm actually a bit surprised that this has now ballooned to $531,621, when I don't think it was ever contemplated that it was ever going to exceed more than $400,000, worst case scenario. And when it was presented to the village, the residents, it was presented as a maximum, I believe, of $400,000. And at that point, there was significant pushback from a significant portion of the village. I think the optics are terrible that we would spend $531,000 and do all these things, which were all alternates when we discussed this at the board meeting. I think that this is something that is going to be utilized mostly, if at all, by the southern portion of Riverwoods, because we still don't have the sidewalks and any manner of getting North Riverwoods residents to get to this site in any way other than by vehicle. And the likelihood of them going there as opposed to going into Deerfield, if they're going to drive anyhow and use one of those facilities, I think is specious. Possible, but specious. I think we're much better off seeing whether or not people are using whatever is there. We made the mistake once already in the village by doing the Woodland area on Riverwoods and Deerfield Road. Everyone thought that if we build it, they will come. We built it, they don't come. This is potentially the same type of situation. We should go in steps. There's no reason why we would balloon this project to $531,000 at the same time where we're putting before the board issues to try and save money on various other areas. We shouldn't be spending with one hand and then, looking for ways to be more frugal on the other. I'm a little surprised at Mike's comment that now we have this capital fund and therefore the money is there and we should spend it, or it's accounted for, and we can go ahead and
Mike,
spend it.
let's not get to direct comments about other trustees, please.
This is what was said.
Just don't, I know it stands,
We just
don't
made a
personal.
comment earlier that the fact that we were putting the money into the capital fund didn't mean that it was going to be spent. It was every individual item was going to be looked at again. And I don't want it to be perceived that now that we have this capital fund transfer, that means that this money is there for capital projects, which we don't have discussion on before the board. That's the only comment I'm making on that.
That's a legitimate comment. I just don't want names and specific addresses.
I don't think anyone is suggesting that we make any investments going forward without the discussion of the board. I think there are several things that that were said there that I think are not factual.
Okay, well, I wasn't
One
done.
is-
Gentlemen,
one is-
let's stop for a moment.
I thought I had the floor.
Hold it. Mike Haber still
Sorry,
has the
I
floor.
apologize. I didn't realize you weren't done. I'm
I
sorry.
interrupted Mr. Haber to call on a
I'm
point of
sorry. I
order, so-
apologize.
But I do want to make sure that we don't get into addressing each other. Let's please stick to the issues. And there's more than enough to argue about without getting into each other.
So the million one that we were able to secure as a result of the sale of the leases on the water tower was a one-time event for the village. I don't think it was presented at the time as a means to finance a extended or campus plan that would include all these alternates. And that seems like where we're going. Instead, I thought the $1.1 million was designed to assist the village in the future, as opposed to getting the annual revenue that water tower was able to give us, which we would have then used, maybe not for capital projects, but we would have used for just regular operating budget. Now it appears that we're thinking differently, and that $1.1 million now is somehow designated for some kind of capital improvements for the village. That certainly wasn't the way I understood it was being presented at the time. And I don't know if any of the other trustees felt that way as well. But again, I don't think the village residents contemplated this. I know I didn't contemplate it. And I think that Henry's idea makes much more sense and is something that I could support.
Other comments, discussion?
You read?
Mike Clayton?
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry. I want to apologize again, Mike. I didn't realize you weren't done. I think there's a number of things that you said that that I want to try to address. One is that there is no link between the $1.1 million and the and any intention to use the $1.1 million as a method for paying for anything other than capital projects in general. It wasn't presented as a capital projects plan to begin with when we went to sell the leases, but it was suggested by our finance director that there's a solid justification for moving that money into a capital fund, and that was the basis for which we wanted to start the overall concept of a capital fund. That's number one. I didn't mean to imply that there was a direct link between the two, but I think the notion of the financial clarity that it gives us from the standpoint of making capital investments as opposed to operating issues is an important one, and one that we should try to embrace going forward. The issues that we're having as a village at this particular point from an operating point of view shouldn't let us to not invest in the long-term health of the village. Now we can, and viability of the village, we can disagree or agree as to whether the campus is part of that, but and does that sort of thing. But there's a couple of suppositions that have been made that I don't believe are accurate. One is that there's substantial opposition among the public to this plan. I think the feedback that we've gotten in any number of ways going forward indicate that there's some people that are in favor, some people that are not in favor, and that it's very inconclusive as to whether the public strongly favors this or does not favor it, number one, going forward. Number two, I don't believe that there's any basis to say that only people in southern Riverwoods South Riverwoods are going to use this. As a matter of fact, most of the people who petitioned us for a play area were not living in South Riverwoods, number one. Number two, the Woodland Preserve has nothing to do with this particular project, nor is it indicative of the future of use of the campus going forward. You can't compare a facility that was intended as a demonstration site with no parking and no access to a core central part of the village that is going to become sort of the center of the brand for the village going forward. And so I don't think that this is somehow the $400,000, I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but every presentation that I gave to the board going forward always referenced something around $800,000 as a total spend. And we're talking here about $850,000. So as far as I know, this is consistent with what we have said in the past.
Well, I'm going to interject myself here. 800 was the cost of the project, 400 was the net to the village, and now it would be 500 something net, which is higher than we had talked about. But those, I think, are the relatively accurate numbers.
Which is only an indicative of the fact that the board chose not to go after a grant for that money. Not that the total cost is any different than it was always proposed to be.
The representations are there. They each have their merits. Cheryl?
Thank you. So I would also like to clarify that I don't think this campus plan project is anything like the Woodland Preserve. The Woodland Preserve concept was from a previous village forester who said, hey, we have this piece of property that the village owns and we really can't do anything with it, but it's really kind of a mess right now. So what we need to do is at least improve the quality of the woodland area. And oh, by the way, while we're doing that, let's make it a demonstration. And wouldn't it be nice if we could encourage people to bicycle? And the shelter was which wasn't, he didn't call it a shelter, I don't remember what he called it, but it was an add-on, and it was very inexpensive because it came, I don't know, we got some kind of deal. It was really inexpensive, and it was kind of an add-on.
It was part of an educational grant, Cheryl.
Right, so that's what it was. And the idea was for that piece of property that maybe people would bike to it. But it was supposed to come with a lot of these different education programs, and that was how people were going to be drawn to it. And then the forester left, so those programs didn't happen. And then, you know, we have debated about what to do with it going forward. But that's a completely different concept. This campus plan is a much broader concept. It's in a different area and it has completely different aspects. I have always liked doing the whole plan because it has a lot of different aspects for a lot of different people. It affords a lot of different amenities. However, I don't like the idea of doing the whole project at this time. And the reason I don't is because we did a very extensive information campaign with our residents, with feedback, and this lasted over many months' time, over many different media. And at the end of this, the board discussed and the board voted on what was essentially the base plan. And that's what the majority of the board sent to the committee to move forward. And I think it's fine if we want to consider alternates, but now especially, I don't want to do that. I feel like, especially even though this is according to the Open Meetings Act, obviously we don't have visitors here other than save one. And I feel as though the residents would think that we were trying to sneak something by on them, which I don't think is fair. I also am concerned, even though I am well aware of the differences between operating and capital should be spent to improve your village. I'm concerned about doing it at this time, because what the residents will see is budget deficit, raising their taxes, and who knows what other financial situation going forward with the state, municipalities, and their own personal pockets. And so I think that we would not have the support of the villagers going forward with this project if we were to do everything. From a branding point of view, I think it is essential to get public support for the concept that you're trying to move forward. And I think we had that with the base plan. And I think we would lose it if we push too far right now, which is why I'm not comfortable with it. I'm okay with the base plan, but I don't want to move forward with the alternates.
Eric?
So I voted originally against the base plan because I felt I was against the play area. And as Trustee Clayton just said, the results were inconclusive. It's totally irresponsible to be spending $550,000 of the public's money with inconclusive results, especially at this time. Those are my comments. They're really brief, but I'm not in favor of this. I've never been in favor of this with the play equipment, and it's just a wrong time to do it. I think we really need to look at this plan and even reduce the base plan. I think we can take advantage of some of the grant. I don't think we lose by not taking advantage of all the grants. And I think that, I don't know, this is just my feeling, that we want to commit ourselves to spending enough to take full advantage of the $300,000, and we simply don't need to do that. I think we can do something, and I think we should do something, but I think we should look at something less than the original base plan.
Okay, Rick, you're the only one that hasn't, so I'll call on you next.
Well, I did say something at the very beginning, but that's beside the point. I wanted to reply to Eric. I don't think that's the way the grant works, Eric. I don't think at this point in time we can remove stuff that we submitted for and still get the grant at all. I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding of the way that grant was. We submitted for a certain amount of stuff, and that's why we had the discussion when we had the discussion. So we can't, at this point, we can't remove stuff from that grant without the possibility of losing it altogether. And I think we would probably lose it altogether if we removed anything out of the base thing that we submitted to the state.
And I think, just as a point, I believe that what Rick said is true. It's not absolute that we'd lose it, but we would stand a very good chance. Henry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would try to reframe this because of the situation we're in today, and that is to approve the base part of the plan and as phase one, and put out to the public that the plan is to have a phase two, and exactly what it is, to put the fence in, to put the playground in. It's going to be done. We just don't have an exact date yet, and it'll depend upon the finances and where the village is at. I think it is useful for the village to have that as a PR. I think it's beneficial. I agree with Cheryl on that. But I think you can get much of the publicity out of it, much of the positive goodwill, by indicating this is a two-phase project. I just have a hard time spending that amount of money at this point in time. And I would suggest, although you can do what you want with the people who put the motion up, that we vote first on doing the base plan and then have a second motion for the addition of the playground and or fence.
Well, Henry, at this
That's
point,
up to
it would
the-
require either to have that withdrawn or you would move to amend the motion, which if not agreed to would require a second and a vote.
Yeah, I think we might get more clarification by getting what we can get and then seeing if you can get the next part in as well. But that's up to the people who had the motion.
Well, again, you could make a motion to amend yourself, Mr. Haber.
I just want the record to reflect that I actually agree with Trustee Chamberlain at this meeting. So I couldn't let this pass without that getting somehow into the
Will
minutes.
somebody go outside and look and see if there's a comment nearby?
I think that the point that she made, which maybe I was not as articulate as she was that at the time that the board passed this original or voted originally on the campus plan, we elected to scale it back to the base. And that's what passed. And this is, I don't even think it's really appropriate for us to even be considering this. I mean, we went through a tremendous amount of discussion with resident feedback, et cetera, to the point where we were able to get an appropriate resolution before the board that passed on the base bid. It would seem to me that now kind of abandoning all of those comments and all of that hard work and just now at the last minute saying, oh, by the way, let's forget about that and let's include the alternates, I just don't think is an appropriate way to govern. That's comment number one. Comment number two is, I think that there is definitely a difference between CapEx and operating expenses. And I think that any appropriate business or village government scales back your CapEx when you're running operating deficits. You can't necessarily invest the same amount on capital improvements when you're running operating deficits. You have to, at times, take a second look at your CapEx expenditures. Those are my comments.
Okay, any other comments? Yes, Mike Clayton.
I think that depends on your having some significant experience in dealing with organizations in crisis. I think that has a lot to do with how much financial viability you have and how much cash you have on hand. But having said that, I think that I've always been a little confused about the concept of past boards committing and binding future boards to what they do. And as far as I recall, it was a different board that considered the campus than is considering it now. And now we're at the stage of implementation. I think that we've all kind of expressed the same opinions now for some time. And I think it's appropriate at this point I would like to get a vote on the entire project on the record. So I would like to move to call the question.
Is there a second on calling the question? There's a second.
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye and raising your right hand.
Aye.
Aye.
That's 3.
Aye.
Okay, so that leaves it up to the chair. The chair will also move to call the question. I think we need to move forward one way or the other and see if this sinks or swims. So That being said, may I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Chamberlain,
Nay.
Trustee Clayton,
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein,
Nay.
Trustee Haber,
Nay.
Trustee Hollander,
Nay.
Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
All right. Madam Clerk, the vote total? Even though I think we all know.
Yes, 2 yeses, 4 nos.
So the motion is defeated. Mr.
And I'd
Hollander,
like to
do you
make a
have
motion, Mayor.
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the base plan. And as part of the motion, that the board continue to consider as a phase 2, the playground and fence at some future date.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Ask a question of clarification.
Yes.
There's a lot more in the alternates besides the play area and the fence. So are you eliminating any of the alternates?
That's my error. Yeah, the amount of the alternates, I think, were included when I asked what the cost was without the playground and fence. I'm including all alternates except for the play area and fence, which brings the village cost up to the same amount that the state would be giving us.
Trustee Chamberlain, do you agree to that clarification?
Wait, now I'm confused.
Okay.
Say that again.
May I, Henry? So what he's saying is the base plan, the alternates that Henry is saying we should accept is the alternate location of the drinking fountain, the west access path, the path on the west side of the village hall. There's 2 columns at the patio to match the 2 that are in the base plan, and some stone around the columns of the shelter. And if I was going to advise the board from a constructability standpoint, I would say that if you're going to do any of those, you should do the drinking fountain and the patio and the shelter surrounds, only because those are things that if you do later, they're going to cost at least double what you're going to do now. The west access path is it's probably going to be less expensive now because they're going to have the equipment out there. Will it be double? Maybe. But so those are the things that the play area and the fence are the 2 things that Henry's talking about pulling out.
Rick, can you give a total for the base plus the alternates that would be included so that there's a dollar amount everybody knows this would be?
And Henry, you were nodding your head. Would you please affirm?
Yes.
On the record?
Yes, and the dollar amount was just under the $300,000 match.
But council is right. We should have a specific.
I think it was 597.
Let me do the math, and I'll 831. Just bear with me. Play some Jeopardy music or something.
Well, I was going to say, so, and I am still okay with my second because I think that, as Trustee Jamerson had said, adding those few alternates are far less expensive and far less expensive to do now.
Well, it certainly eliminates what was the major additional cost and the most of a lightning rod, shall we say. So
569,203. I would suggest that we still budget something more for construction contingencies, but that's the number.
5,000 into 600,000 maximum, which allows us to match the state.
That's fine, but I as long as, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to belabor the point, but I want to make sure that if we make it 600,000, that we don't add stuff that we didn't agree to now just because we have the funds.
Agreed.
No, I think it's understood that would be.
I want to make sure we're all on the same page. I don't want to get my butt in a sling later.
No, it would be starting, as I understood with Henry, we'd have to start all over again for anything else beyond what's being proposed. Mr. Haber, you are.
Only thing I would say is that if you could do the drinking fountain, that second drinking fountain, and still come in under the $300,000 or at the $300,000, I would say, why not just do it?
That is included, Mike. It's only the fence and the
Oh, right. Okay, just the fence and the
play
playground.
area.
Right. Okay, that's right. I'm mistaken. I misspoke.
Okay.
And just for clarification, we know for a fact that by adding these few additional, we will get the matching grant for them, correct?
Yes. Because they match up to half of the cost and where it falls, et cetera. So any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve everything but the fence and the play area for a total of budgeted $600,000. That's the right number, Rick?
Not to exceed $600,000.
Dollars. All right, may I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein.
Nay.
Trustee Haber.
Aye.
Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
And Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
That is 4 ayes and 2 nays.
Okay. So we
No,
got
no.
through it.
Just the second nay.
Who said nay? Who was the second nay? I only heard Eric.
Eric, Mike,
Michael
we
Clayton.
thought Mike Clayton said
I
nay.
said
That's what I
aye.
heard.
So I thought you did too.
Mike, you want to change your
I'm
clarify
sorry.
yours?
I said aye.
Okay. It sounded like nay, so we'll correct that.
Okay, I will correct that.
No problem, Mike. It's just a correction. So it's
Can I
5.
assume, John, that if the state doesn't give us $300,000, we will not go ahead with this project?
Well,
I mean, the
again,
$600,000 was on the assumption that we
it's-
have a $300,000 matching, not just that we're going to spend.
well, that they're giving us the
600.
300,000. They've already given us like 180. It's money that was committed through the federal government, et cetera. So I don't think there's any way they could not do it. We'd sue them otherwise or whatever. But Henry, if we get there, we'll take a hard look at it. But I don't know, counsel, you have any sage advice here? My understanding is that money's there and it doesn't go away.
We have signed or presented a number of agreements with them, and I don't know if there's another subsequent agreement we sign as we let the construction contract, but I believe we have a number of agreements with them. The
We have a
government
contract.
but unfold a contract, so at this point, we're just acting pursuant to our agreement
Right.
with them.
So Henry, I understand your caution and I share it, but I don't think it should be a problem.
If we made a motion that we would spend up to $300,000 of village money, that might solve the problem?
Well, not necessarily, because we get reimbursed, we have to sign the contract, et cetera.
All right.
So much as I'd love to hold the state's feet to the fire, I'm just not sure we can. I think our action afterwards would be to sue them, which can't get blood from a turnip, but Mr. Haber will probably represent us. He's,
I do think it's worth noting on the record, though, that we are all, at least my yes vote is based on the assumption that we will receive the grant.
I assure you that if I'm still mayor, which I think I will be while this is going on, I won't let it go either. We all believe that this is part of a grant matching program, period. So, and we already have about half of it, so hopefully we'll get the rest of it soon. So yes, it is contingent on that. That's the whole deal. I just don't have the ability to give you a guarantee on it right now. Okay, there is no old business. Does anyone have anything for the good of the order? There's no need to go into executive session. Do I hear a motion to adjourn to the next
moved.
meeting on June 2nd?
Second.
I need a motion before the second.
Cheryl moved.
I didn't hear it, sorry.
John.
Wait a minute, clearly there's an electronic problem. Daphne didn't hear Mike right either. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
Stay healthy, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Hey, keep hoping that we all go freer on the 28th.